What's your name?
My name is Joseph France.
Nice to meet you. You're going to have a minute to pitch and then get some feedback. Are you feeling ready?
I'm feeling good.
Awesome. What are you building?
So we are working on an AI agent for time and billing. So if you are one of the 20 million people in this country who has to sit down at the end of the day and write, I spent this many hours on this, I spent this many minutes on this. The most classic example is lawyers who bill hourly. We have an AI bot that does your timesheet at the end of the day.
All right. Well, anything else you want to say in this minute?
No, let's.
All right. That's a round of applause. Okay. Where do I want to start? Well, I guess this is pitch feedback. You didn't give a poor 18-second pitch, but you did give a very short pitch. And I'd say a lot of people in the early of this, I actually have some exposure to this problem. I think a thing you'll face, you probably already know this, is a lot of people are unfamiliar with this problem. If they're not a lawyer or they've never really freelanced or contracted, or if they grew up in a certain era, they just go, what, why, and what? So that's maybe something I would build a little bit more. But so time tracking using AI, what does that look like from a UX perspective?
From a UX perspective, so the first thing it looked like, this was a personal problem for me. And so I had, for many years, I did over 12,000 hours of time entries. I used to have to track, I was in litigation consulting. I used to track in 6-minute increments. What did I do? Who did I do it for? Which project did this relate to? And in doing that, I started to play around with writing software to analyze my unstructured data because I have a background in statistics and turn that into billable time records that I could use. And so the product that I always wanted was at the end of the day, instead of having to first of all, ideally you contemporaneously track. You're starting and stopping timers, but over 50% of hourly billers do not start and stop timers, and probably even vastly more than half do not start and stop timers regularly. There's a small percentage that do contemporaneously.
They do the logging in hindsight.
Yeah, so most people are reconstructors. They reconstruct their day at the end of the day. And what I always wanted was a button that you could press at the end of the day and it would reconstruct your day for you. So the first product we ever built was that. It was a button and it would go through all your data and then it would reconstruct your day. As time went on, I found that people, even that one act of pressing the button was a little much for people. So now it just runs in the background. Whenever you log on, you see all of your suggested time entries based on your connected data sources. So from a UI UX perspective, it's almost like we've tried to completely remove the UI UX layer. It's just done. And then you look and see okay, what do I have? You review it and then see can I now approve these time entries?
So this is a desktop app?
We have a mobile app and then we also have a web application that lives in the cloud.
So which one is the most frequent used?
Web application.
So if I'm using the web app, how does it know what to suggest to me?
So the way that it would know is we look at your email. So we connect in through either your Gmail, calendar integration, Outlook, mail integration. We monitor certain chat, we can monitor chat threads. So we have a bot that joins a Slack channel and reads the Slack channel. So we ingest all of this data programmatically. And then from time to time, we, every few hours, we run a job that analyzes all of this data over the last 3 hours and says okay, what was this person doing?
So you have to integrate it with all of your tools.
Yes, you have to integrate it with all of your tools.
Have you heard of Rewind?
That does sound familiar, but it's something similar to, I think, Rewind in that I don't know that they're necessarily a billing platform, but they kind of, if I remember, I might be thinking of a different app, but you can run your kind of day in reverse and see what happened on your computer?
I'll come back to that. So it's, yes. Okay. So another thing I haven't talked about yet, I've built in this space, unfortunately. So I worked for a company called TopTal, which is one of the larger freelancer marketplaces in the world. The CEO is the wildest individual I've ever met in my life. I led some products over there. And for the year I was there, one of his pet projects that I was running as the product lead was called Top Tracker. It was the time tracking desktop app that would allow freelancers, whether they were freelancers on our marketplace or in other marketplaces, do time tracking, stop, start, logging, categorization, all that other stuff. So it's like the manual parts of this, like the AI parts of this make real sense in the generalized harvest, toggle, top tracker, like
Yes.
these time tracking apps that people use. I totally get that from the, hey, solve some of these categorization, reconciliation issues that I have. That makes sense to me. The part that feels hard, and that as I'm learning about how the app works, is the fact that yours needs so much integration. If there's two problems with tracking historically, it's one, I need to do it. And two, while I do it, I need to drag context from different places.
Yeah.
You're solving, I think, the second one a little bit because like once you're integrated, you're dragging the context in.
Yeah.
But because you not only need me to integrate, that must mean too, you might miss some things or I need to kind of be aware of what's going on. I brought up Rewind because so you're mostly correct in your analysis there. So it's a startup. They've moved away from this to an AI listening to pendant sort of deal. But their first product was an app you could put on your desktop, and it would take screenshots of your screen literally every second, and they would embed them, from an LLM perspective, and therefore make them searchable. And you could rewind on your screenshots. You could basically Black Mirror your day. And that to me, I was like wondering if that's what you were doing when you were first talking of like, are you taking screenshots of everything I'm doing and then using AI to understand it? I know this isn't maybe where you expected me to go, but like my question to you is why not do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that part of the reason why is when you think about what does our product do, it's in many ways a tool that constructs billable time records. And we find that we get a really pretty good answer without doing that, without taking a screenshot. And it's just one additional data source. But when you think of, we're plugged into a lot of the communications layer. We have meeting bots that join meetings and can figure, out how long were you on the meeting, what was said, transcript.
But then you need me to be able to integrate too, right? Which is like, it needs to be allowed to come to my meetings.
That's right. Yes. But what I was going to say, why we don't take a screenshot, I think that that's probably a capability that at some point we'll have in the future. But every time we add a data source, it gets added to a large pool of connected data that constructs billable time records. And generally, I think the feedback we've gotten from our customers is that we're getting pretty good results with the data pipelines that we have. So that's not one that
but it requires that everything falls in those data pipelines, which I guess your hypothesis could be people who will use and pay for this will probably be using the tools that we're integrating with versus, I guess in my head, I'm going, how do you make it as generalizable as possible? Do you have the desire to make it generalizable and about what's going on in my head? Or did you go like, that's actually not important because we're so focused on the top 30 use cases that we can identify all the data connectors we need?
Yeah, I'd say that the main the number one and number two data connectors is calendar and emails, and then it's chats, and then it's the kind of real time transcription. So we have like a phone you can use, or we have like a meeting bot you can use. So we're constantly thinking about how do we add new data to make our product, like make our time records even more robust and make the timesheet even more robust. But with the data that we have, and almost everyone is on either like Microsoft or Gmail calendar. We have one-click integration. It's pretty easy to click, authorize with one or two different services and start getting really good timesheets with Gen AI like off the bat. And another thing I'd say is it is important to think about that what we're doing as a company is constructing billable time records, which is actually a different problem to solve than analyzing a digital history. Because like a digital history does not correspond one-to-one with a billable time record.
It would definitely include it though.
It would include it, but like you'll notice if you look at the data that people bill on average like 8 hours a day, but they don't sit at their computer for 8 hours a day. They sit at their computer.
Those 8 hours would be there in the day. I hear what you're saying.
You have to sort of extrapolate out and see the digital data.
I guess I'm saying I like supersets better than subsets, and you're going, oh, but it's a subset anyway. And fair enough.
Exactly. We're Bayesians. We're estimating what they were doing on the other 6 hours that we don't have any digital data based on the digital data that we do have.
Two more questions, and I actually have some overall feedback that I think will take your approach to the next level. How do you think about competitors in this space building competitive feature sets?
Yeah.
There are a lot of time for those who've never. How many people have used a time tracker for work purposes before? Actually, yeah, it's very infrequent. Actually, more in this crowd than I expected. For those who
1 in 6 people build time hourly.
That makes total sense to me. But for those who don't know, there are a lot of tools in this, like a lot more tools than you'd expect in this space, and startups.
Yes.
So how do you think about them?
Yeah, no, it's one of the oldest categories of software. I mean, the punch card literally comes from the old computers that you had to punch cards, and then they would feed these into. So it's an old category of software that really hasn't been, in my mind, updated on a great horizontal product since Harvest and Toggle came out. And I think Toggle is maybe a little more advanced than Harvest in terms of where their product's at. Our core competitors, because our beachhead market is legal, our core competitors are the Gen AI legal companies. And so there's a group of us, and there's 4 or 5 companies building in the space. And I think in many ways on that front, it is a race on product because this capability now exists where it didn't before. And the beachhead market of lawyers, who is like probably the most interested in it because they track time most granularly, is starting to adopt it. And so I think of the competitors as us being in kind of a small group of kind of like what you might call like Uber, Lyft, Via, where this is sort of inevitably going to happen in law. And then I think it will spread out to other markets, and it's a race on market share. That's how I think about the competitors, because honestly, like, what is the golden ideal product? It's your timesheet is done, and you don't have to think about it. There's no user experience; it's just done. Like you just work, you do your thing, and
do you think everyone's going to build it?
And it, to me, the path to getting there. Well, I don't think anyone is there yet. As the foundation models get better, as like it's. Like I don't think I have some uniquely brilliant insight.
So it's a commodity.
So
that brings me to the next question. What's the most interesting way you approach it today that you'd say is like today's secret sauce?
Today's secret sauce. Well,
and not secret sauce again. I like how honest you are about like this is a commodity. So let me not use the word secret. What's the most interesting sauce? Like you here's what's interesting.
I'll say what's very interesting about our product now is our innovation in the database models. And when we started building this, we kind of at a certain point said like, okay, we're pot committed on a time tracker, and AI time tracking was not. When we started really digging into time tracking, what's going on in time tracking, okay, the Harvest and Toggle came out, we started to find that the software that you use to buy time, which I would call actually Gusto and Deal, and the software that you use to sell time, like Toggle and Harvest, are very disconnected. And the reason that they're disconnected is because if you look at basically the way that their database models are structured, they sort of have to be. However, there is a bridge that you can build between time buying software, which you might call HR software, and time selling software, which is billing software, that natively integrates the time that you're buying and the time that you're selling. And so what we do, and I think what our secret sauce is, and it's not that much of a secret, but we enable time as inventory to naturally map the time that you buy from a contractor or an employee or someone else to the time that you sell to a client. And by doing that, one of the biggest problems we found in time tracking was like, for example, duplicative entry. People would get a timesheet from a contractor, they'd punch it into Gusto or Deal or whatever, and then they would punch it into Toggle or Harvest from their contractor. And we're like, there's this huge problem of like duplicative entry that has nothing to do with AI. And how can we rebuild our database model to solve duplicative entry?
How did you?
What we basically did is sort of chain linked our database objects so that every database object is sort of exists as a chain object on a particular sort of in a space, in a particular like dimensional space. So like, for example, a time record can move between objects because the database objects are sort of nested in this way that like when I buy time from a contractor, then that contractor has created a record that I can then move to me, and then I can then move to the client. And so
how do the current one, like Toggle or Harvest, what's their central database object?
Their central database objects is they would have a client object, and then they would have a time record object, and then the time would be associated with the client.
So this is the best answer you possibly could have given, but like I wonder how legible it is. It's super legible to me because there are innovations in the space. Who feels like they understand the value of what he just said about database objects? Raise your hand. So like this is super interesting. I loved your answer. I don't know if it's ever going to be useful to you to translate this to people who aren't me. So I don't know if you'll be asked this question the same way. So this might never be useful. But I want to explain it to everybody because again, I thought it was such a good answer. And I'm going to use the lens of applicant tracking systems to talk about this. So applicant tracking systems had this issue in a way in there are two that are like the most modern, Greenhouse and Lever, that I'm sure if you've job searched in the past 5 or 6 years, you've seen them both, that are the modern set. And aside from Greenhouse, there's a ton of legacy ones, iCIMS, Workday, and a bunch of other startups, Workable, whatever. Lever, its primary innovation that didn't wind up achieving market dominance, but was interesting, was all these other ATSs historically are built off of a job. And a job has candidates. So if you log in as a recruiter, you will always see the interface and the way it works is always based on a job because you need a job to exist to have a candidate to exist. And so if you log in, a list of jobs will have candidates inside of it. And if you can add a candidate without a job, it's only because they've hijacked their own database to like have a ghost job that doesn't exist such that a candidate can be input even though there's no affiliated job. Lever was like, this is problematic from a database perspective, but it also changes the user experience of this and it makes recruiting. So their whole innovation was we're a candidate-centric model. And so our database has candidates first that applied to jobs and it reversed this. And you're saying, when we're taking it to the next level, a time record has no association and therefore can move between entities of different types.
That's right. Yeah.
That's so interesting. Such a good answer. Oh man. Okay. Now I'm going to bring this all together. So I think you need to do more world building. So I think it's the fact you have a simple product that can be told in 18 seconds. But have you raised money yet?
We've raised some money. We went through an accelerator and we did an angel round.
Which accelerator?
We went through Techstars, Boulder.
Cool. When you go to raise that next level institutional money, people will be, not only because they don't have experience, but even have experience abstracted from this problem, from the way that you are talking about it when you just say it's a time tracker with this agentic AI. What I want you to talk about is like, the thing you just said, which is, and you can say this in a way that I think is legible immediately. The problem with time tracking is it's contractors or freelancers or certain portions of knowledge work that do it in an abstract way in isolation and then submit their work into employers who must ingest it. And the innovation with making it agentic and AI fueled is not just that we can use that to understand what you did without you having to log it, how you did it, become more embedded in your workflow and gain understanding and context, but also it allows us to understand that for the purposes of giving it to its customer, its recipient, which is the employer who must pay you or the vendor or your client, or whatever else that might be. And so what we're building is the first agentic first, or I don't know about if you're actually agentic. You might convince me otherwise in a different conversation.
Yeah.
The first AI first time tracker that not only makes it easier to track your time, and so you no longer you have to stop start. I love, by the way, you didn't again do that in the first pitch, like saying hey, and you should know most people stop start. Actually, most people try to stop start and fail. 50% or more are doing the in hindsight reconstruction, and saying that again is going to surprise some people who don't know about it. Some investors are going to be like, wait, most people who time track do this retroactively?
You mean my lawyer didn't actually spend 24 minutes on the call that he sent me the bill for? Yes, actually, that we do mean that. They don't. They look at their bill. They look at their day and they look at who can absorb the bills, and all right, this sound reasonable.
My lawyer for Fragency as a startup has like moved hours he spent on the phone with me. He's like, I'll charge you associate hours. We'll put it on this person's ledger. I'm like, okay, like that's good for me, but I don't know what you're doing.
Right. Well, no, it's interesting because ultimately, like the relationship between the lawyer and the client is like they send you a bill and the bill has to be reasonable.
Right.
If it's not reasonable, you're not going to pay it. But constructing that reasonable bill, it's still a lot of work.
This is why I want you to go with this more thematic pitch. And you'll still say, hey, here's the simple thing we do. And the reason is because then people can bet on you and your approach. I like the conversation we just had. If I thought, okay, would I want to invest in a time tracker? I hate the time tracker I built. I think time trackers are mostly annoying. Our last office was on 22nd Street. It was the old Harvest office. So that happened after I even built a time tracker, then went into a time tracker's office for 4 years. I wouldn't want to invest in a time tracker. You, however, told me you're a time tracker embedded in a time and billing philosophy. And that's not, I don't think that's how you lead. You know, like, we're time and, but that's the next thing you say after saying we're time tracker, but let me world build. We're time tracker, here's what's happening, here's what needs to happen in the world, here's how the world is changing, because also all the things you're saying are relevant. I don't necessarily believe that this is the future, but if you listen to like some tech idiots like Naval Ravikant, who's like, everyone's gonna be a freelancer in the future. I'm sorry, I just called him a tech idiot. We'll decide if we keep that in the cut, but I'm going to repeat it in case we won't. If you listen to some people like who are influential, like Naval Ravikant, I don't agree with him on this, but he says things like everyone's going to be a freelancer. They're going to wake up in the morning and jobs will be in a queue, and we're going to be on our spaceship, and we pick which jobs we want. We go do those jobs. We'll have to track time. It's going to be much more transactional. If he's right, or if he's even somewhat right, then time tracking and time legibility and this reconciliation that you're talking about is all going to be far more relevant. So again, if you tell the pitch this way, again, still say what it is simply, that will, if you can tell that story well, it will stick with the investor for a week. They won't stop thinking about it.
And it does, as you have time billers as contractors as opposed to employees, it really does turn time into a variable cost that needs to be thought about sort of like more consciously about how much time are we buying.
Did you see the YC startup that just got into hot water over the past 2 days? Do you know what I'm talking about? The Y Combinator startup?
Yes, it was the factory automation. Yes.
Who's seen this? One person in the back. There's a startup that just got in trouble. It's a YC startup. It was just their vibe. I don't think the product's actually like the wrong idea, but it's two very young individuals who are building this like very intense factory worker monitoring solution. And they made a very insensitive video about like the implications of like, hey, go look at factory worker number 17 is 12% less efficient, and then they discover 20% less over the month. And it's somewhat, you're kind of making, the reason I brought him up, and I say this in a good way, you're kind of bringing up the same thing of like, this stuff matters to capitalists and to labor, and the transactions we make, quantifying them has challenge, but it also has upside. I think it's a great point. For the sake of time, we'll have to end here, but I think this is the longest I've ever gone on the pitch of the feedback loop. So super fascinating, and I love the approach that you're taking, so good luck with it.
Thank you.
Thanks.